All right. Fourth video of developmental psychology, we're going to talk about parents and peer influence, and then we're going to talk about adolescence. So this is going to be a short video, I promise. In the womb, embryos receive different nutrition and varying levels of exposure to toxic agents. And normal stimulation during the early years is critical for optimal brain development. And after brain maturation provides us with an abundance of neural connections, experience preserves our activated connections, and unused connections degenerate through the process of pruning. And throughout our life, our actions strengthen some neural pathways while others weaken from disuse. We learn to keyboard or skateboard with increasing skill as our brain incorporates this learning. So this is a good graphic showing you, this rat has a very impoverished environment. There's nothing going on in here, nothing to stimulate it. So here's his brain cell. But here's an enriched environment, and here's this brain cell. I mean, it's obvious biology here. Parental influence is clearest at the extremes. For example, in the abused who become abusive, and in the loved but firmly handled children who become self-confident and socially competent. Parental influence is also reflected in children's political attitudes, religious beliefs, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to click that, and personal manners. That's important. Parental influence is very strong in those three categories: political attitudes, religious beliefs, and personal manners. However, environmental influences typically account for less than 10% of children's personality differences. And this finding suggests that parents can be given less credit for their children's success as well as blame for their failures. Parental and peer influences are often complementary. Parents are more influential when it comes to education, discipline, responsibility, orderliness, charitableness, and other ways of interacting with authority figures. Peers are more important for learning cooperation, for finding the road to popularity, and for inventing styles of interaction among people of the same age. Parents can influence the culture that shapes their peer group by helping to select their children's neighborhood and schools. So let's talk about adolescence. Adolescence is defined as the transition period from childhood to adulthood, and it typically begins with puberty. And this is the period of sexual maturation during which a person can become capable of reproducing. So adolescence, again, is the transition period from childhood to adulthood, starts at puberty with the onset of rapid growth and developing sexual maturity. A surge of hormones triggers a 2-year period of growth that begins in girls around age 11 and in boys around age 13. And during this growth spurt, the reproductive organs are the primary sex characteristics, and they develop dramatically. And so do the secondary sex characteristics. And these secondary sex characteristics are things like breasts and hips in girls, facial hair, deepened voice, broader shoulders in boys, and for both sexes, you're talking about pubic hair and underarm hair. And the landmarks of puberty are the first ejaculation or spermarchy in boys, and this usually occurs by about age 14, and the first menstrual cycle period, menarche, in girls, and that's what menarche is. It's the first menstrual period, and this is usually within a year of age 12. And as in earlier life stages, the sequencing of physical changes is more predictable than the timing. We can't time these things. You can't guarantee that they'll start by a certain time, but once they start happening, we can almost guarantee the sequence that they will happen in. Early maturation is good for boys, but may be stressful for girls, and this depends on how people react to their maturity. So this is the physical development that begins with puberty. It starts earlier with girls, but eventually boys keep growing and become taller than girls after age 14. Brain development includes the selective pruning of unused neurons and connections, and the growth of myelin, or the fatty tissue that forms around axons and speeds neurotransmission, enables better communication with other brain regions. Frontal lobe maturation that improves judgment, impulse control, and the ability to plan for the long term lags behind in the emotional limbic system. And the pubertal hormonal surge, early development of the emotional limbic system, and later maturation of the frontal lobe help explain teens' occasional impulsiveness, risky behaviors, and emotional storms. During the early teen years, reasoning is often self-focused, and adolescents may think their private experiences are unique to them. But gradually, adolescents develop the capacity for what Piaget called formal operations. And this is the capacity to reason abstractedly. This includes the ability to test a hypothesis and deduce consequences. The new reasoning power is evident in adolescents pondering and debating such abstract topics like human nature, good and evil, and truth and justice. Lawrence Kohlberg was a psychologist that contended that moral thinking likewise proceeds through a series of stages. So with our development, as we're going through Piaget's stages of sensory motor stage, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational, we are also going through what Kohlberg calls our developing morality stages. And he says that pre-conventional morality is that of self-interest. Conventional morality cares for others and upholds laws and rules, and in some people, a post-conventional morality of agreed-upon rights or basic ethical principles. Kohlberg's critics argue that post-conventional level represents morality from the perspective of the European and North American educated middle class. And this prizes individualism, or giving priority to one's own goals rather than to group goals. And it's biased against the moral reasoning of those in collectivist societies. And people in collectivist societies have morality that's based more on a sensitivity to group goals. And Kohlberg talks about the difference between a moral feeling and a moral action. A moral feeling is that you know that something is wrong. However, it might not dictate your actions. For example, this is a picture right here of looting going on in a store in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And this was a huge moral problem. People needed food. They needed toilet paper. I mean, it's not like this lady is stealing luxury items. She's stealing paper towels and food. So is that right to steal to feed your family? I mean, that's an ultimate moral question right there. Again, here's another slide that's going to show you pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional morality. Jonathan Haidt also had a social intuitionist explanation, and he said that moral feelings precede moral reasoning, and so moral judgment involves quick gut feelings. Character education programs teach children to empathize with others and to delay gratification. And as thinking matures, behavior also becomes less selfish and more caring. Erik Erikson, and we talked about him in the last video, he theorized 8 stages of life, and he said each has its own psychosocial task. In infancy, this is the first year, the issue is trust versus mistrust. In toddlerhood, the challenge is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Preschoolers, age 3 to 5, learn initiative or guilt. And then elementary school children, age 6 to puberty, develop competence or inferiority. A chief task of adolescence is to solidify one's sense of self or your identity. And adolescents usually try out different selves in different situations. Often this role confusion gets resolved by the gradual reshaping of a self-definition that unifies the various selves into a consistent and comfortable sense of who one is. And this part of our self-concept that comes from group memberships is our social identity, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. In some cases, adolescents may form their identity early simply by taking on their parents' values and expectations. Others may adopt an identity defined in opposition to parents, but in conformity with a particular peer group. And Erik Erikson believed that forging a clear and comfortable identity is a precondition for establishing close relationships. He said that for young adults in your 20s to early 40s, the issue is intimacy, and this is the ability to form emotionally close relationships versus isolation. And for middle-aged adults, he said that it's generativity versus stagnation, and then the challenge of late adulthood is integrity versus despair. So again, I just talked about these things, forming an identity. This is the chief task of adolescence. Again, you're going to try out different ideas of who you think you are in order to really find out who you are. Your social identity is who you are as far as your group memberships go. Intimacy simply means the ability to form close, loving relationships. And this is a developmental hallmark for late adolescence and early adulthood. As adolescents in Western cultures form their own identities, they're going to become increasingly independent of their parents. And nonetheless, researchers have found that most teenagers relate to their parents reasonably well. Oh, I'm sorry. Positive relations with parents support positive peer relations, and teens are described as herd animals. They talk, dress, and act more like their peers than their parents. Although adolescence is a time of increasing peer influence, parents continue to influence teens in shaping their religious faith as well as college and career choices. Clearly, the graduation from adolescence to adulthood is now taking longer. In the United States, the average age at first marriage has increased more than 4 years since the 1960s. The time from 18 to the mid-20s is an increasingly not yet settled phase of life, and some people are now calling this emerging adulthood. And during this time, many young people are going to attend college or work, but they continue to live in their parents' home. So that's it for today. Thanks.